A self-made millionaire walked into his son's mansion dressed in rags to test his family's love. What his brother said in the first 30 seconds made him wish he'd never come back. But what his youngest daughter did on day 7 will restore your faith in humanity. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. Not to the test, not to the rejection, but to the moment Richard Hale realized he'd lost his family long before he pretended to lose his money. December 15, 2023. Richard Hale's 62nd birthday. His children had thrown him a party at his estate, 73 guests, a live jazz band, champagne that cost $800 per bottle, but Richard Hale stood in the corner of his own party and felt completely alone. Richard hadn't always been wealthy. He'd grown up in a trailer park in rural Ohio. His father died when he was 7. His mother worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. At 9:47 p.m., Richard overheard a conversation that would change his life forever. His son, Marcus, 38 years old. His daughter, Jennifer, 36. His brother, Thomas, 59. They were in Richard's private library, and they were talking about him. Marcus's voice was cold, calculated. "Look, the old man's 62. How much longer can he really run the company? We need to start positioning ourselves for the transition." Jennifer responded quickly. "I've already talked to the estate attorney. If Dad's mental faculties start declining, we can get power of attorney," and Thomas interrupted her. "You're thinking too small. Richard built Hale Construction from nothing. It's worth $47 million now. When he's gone, we split it 4 ways, minus Emily, obviously. She gets nothing." Emily, Richard's youngest daughter, 28 years old, a social worker making $38,000 a year, the only one who hadn't asked him for money in 5 years, Marcus laughed. "Emily, she's useless to us anyway. Living in that tiny apartment, working with homeless people, she made her choice." In that moment, Richard Hale understood something that shattered him. His family didn't love him. They loved his money, and they were just waiting for him to die. But what Richard heard next made his blood run cold. Jennifer's voice dropped to a whisper. "I spoke with Dr. Morrison last week. Dad's been having those headaches. If we can document any cognitive decline, any forgetfulness, we can move faster than you think." Thomas added, "The company's board meeting is in 6 weeks. If we present a united front, we can vote him out. He built it, sure, but he doesn't have majority control anymore, not since he gave us those shares for tax purposes." Marcus jumped in, excited now. "And once we're in control, we sell. I've already had preliminary conversations with Bergman Industries. They'd pay $52 million easy, maybe more." Richard felt his heart pounding. $52 million. They were planning to sell his life's work. The company he'd built from a single pickup truck and a toolbox. The company that bore his name. Jennifer spoke again. "We just need to be patient, and when the time comes, we act decisively, all of us together, no hesitation." Richard stepped back from the door, his whole body shaking. These weren't strangers plotting against him. This was his blood, his children, his brother. Richard didn't sleep that night. By 4:00 a.m., he had made a decision. He would give them exactly what they were waiting for, his downfall. Over the next 3 weeks, Richard Hale orchestrated the most elaborate test of loyalty his family would ever face. First, he transferred every asset he owned into an untouchable trust. His mansion, his company shares, his investment portfolio, all of it $47 million placed beyond anyone's reach for exactly 30 days. His attorney, Gerald Winters, had been with him for 20 years. Gerald was the only person who knew the truth. "Richard, are you absolutely sure about this?" Gerald had asked him. "I need to know, Gerald. I need to know if anyone actually loves me." Second, he created a false narrative, a series of catastrophic business losses, a failed investment in a startup that never existed, debts that were completely fabricated. He had his accountant leak documents to Marcus showing massive losses. He had business associates spread rumors at the country club. He canceled contracts and made it look like Hale Construction was hemorrhaging money. Within days, the whispers started. Richard Hale was finished. He'd gambled everything on a tech venture that collapsed. He was bankrupt. And third, he transformed himself back into the man he used to be, the poor kid from Ohio who had nothing but his dignity. He bought clothes from Goodwill, worn jeans with holes in the knees, a stained jacket that smelled like mothballs, old boots with the soles coming apart. He stopped shaving, stopped getting his hair cut. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw his father staring back at him. The transformation was complete. On January 7, 2024, Richard Hale walked away from his mansion with $43 in his pocket, a duffel bag of old clothes, and a plan to discover who his family really was. He left a note on his desk in the study, just 4 words, "I've lost everything, sorry." Then he disappeared. The hardest part wasn't leaving his home. It wasn't giving up the luxury or the comfort. The hardest part was knowing that within hours his family would find that note, and he would finally see their true faces. Would they panic? Would they search for him? Would they worry about his safety, his health, his well-being? Or would they celebrate? January 7th, 3:47 p.m. Richard's first stop was his son's house. Marcus lived in a $3.2 million home that Richard had helped him buy 5 years ago. Richard walked up the long driveway, looking disheveled, carrying his duffel bag. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from what he was about to discover. He knocked on the door, and what happened in the next 60 seconds would set the tone for everything that followed. Marcus opened the door. He was dressed in golf clothes, clearly about to leave for the country club. His face changed instantly from confusion to disgust. "Dad, what the hell happened to you?" Richard's voice came out tired, broken. "Marcus, I lost everything. The company collapsed. There was a bad investment and I need help, son." There was a long pause. Marcus looked over his shoulder. His wife Ashley was visible in the background, arranging flowers in a crystal vase. Marcus lowered his voice and stepped outside, closing the door behind him. "You need help, Dad. I've got my own family to think about. Ashley just redecorated the house, cost us $180,000. I've got the kids' private school tuition, the club membership." Richard watched his son's face carefully, studying every micro-expression, every shift of the eyes, every twitch of the mouth. "I just need a place to stay, just for a little while until Marcus cut him off. "No, absolutely not. You can't stay here. Ashley would lose her mind. The neighbors would. Look, Dad, you're the one who always said take care of yourself first. Remember, you built that company from nothing. You can do it again." Marcus reached for his wallet. He pulled out some bills and counted them. "Here's $200. Get a motel room, clean yourself up. And Dad, don't come back here looking like this. You're embarrassing yourself." The door closed. Richard stood alone on the doorstep, staring at the money in his hand. Through the window, he could see Marcus walking back inside. He watched as his son kissed his wife on the cheek, grabbed his golf clubs, and headed toward the garage. Going on with his day as if nothing had happened. As if his father hadn't just lost everything. As if his father wasn't standing outside, broken and desperate. Marcus Hale gave his father $200 and shut the door in his face. The son Richard had sent to Harvard. The son whose first business he'd funded with $500,000. The son whose wedding cost $300,000, every penny paid by Richard. The son he'd believed would always be there. Richard walked back down the driveway. He could hear Marcus's car starting in the garage, heard the electric gate open. And then Marcus drove past him without even slowing down. Didn't wave, didn't look back, just drove right past his father like he was a stranger begging on the street. Day 2. Richard drove his old pickup truck, one he'd kept hidden in a storage unit for years, to his daughter Jennifer's condo. The truck was a 1998 Ford F-150. The same model he'd driven when he started his construction company. He'd kept it all these years as a reminder of where he came from. Now it was all he had left. Jennifer lived in a luxury high-rise in Stamford, Connecticut, 32nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Long Island Sound. Richard rode the elevator up, watching his reflection in the mirrored walls. He barely recognized himself. 3 days without shaving, hair uncombed, the smell of cheap motel soap on his skin. Jennifer was a real estate agent. She sold $50 million in properties last year. Richard had co-signed her first investment property when no bank would touch her. She owed him everything. She opened the door wearing yoga clothes, a green juice in her hand, clearly in the middle of something. "Dad, oh my God, what happened to you?" "Jennifer, sweetheart, I need to talk to you. Can I come in?" Jennifer blocked the doorway slightly. "Actually, this isn't a great time. I have a client call in 10 minutes and Dad, you look terrible. Are you sick?" "Not sick, broke. The company went under, I lost the house, I lost everything." Jennifer's face changed, not to sympathy, to something else, something harder. Her eyes narrowed slightly and Richard could see her mind working, calculating. "You lost everything? How is that even possible? You were worth $50 million. Bad investments, legal troubles, it doesn't matter how it happened. What matters is I need help, just temporarily, I need." Jennifer interrupted him, stepping back into her condo. "Dad, I'm sorry, but I just can't take this on right now. I'm closing on a huge deal next week. My whole commission depends on me staying focused. If clients see me with someone who looks like you, it'll ruin my reputation." She paused. Her voice became almost pleading, but not for him, for herself. "You understand, right? You always said business comes first. You taught me that." She pulled out her phone and started typing. "I'm texting you a number. It's a shelter downtown. They're really good. They have job placement programs, counseling, meals. They'll help you get back on your feet." Richard felt his phone buzz in his pocket. "Jennifer, I don't need a shelter. I need my daughter." She wouldn't meet his eyes. "I have to go, Dad. My client's calling. Good luck with everything." The door closed. Richard stood in the hallway, staring at his phone. The text had come through, an address for a homeless shelter on the south side of town. Jennifer sent her father to a homeless shelter, and then she went back to her yoga class. Richard later learned that within an hour of their conversation, Jennifer had called Marcus. The two of them spent 40 minutes on the phone discussing whether Richard had any hidden assets they could claim before creditors seized everything. They never once discussed whether he was safe, whether he had food, whether he was okay. Day 3, Richard went to see his brother Thomas. Thomas was only 3 years younger than Richard. They'd grown up together in that trailer park. They'd survived their father's death together. Richard remembered the day their father died. He was 7 years old. Thomas was 4. Their mother collapsed in the kitchen, and it was Richard who called 911. It was Richard who held Thomas while their mother screamed. After that, Richard became more than a brother. He became a second parent. When Thomas was bullied in school, Richard fought his battles. When Thomas wanted to play Little League but they couldn't afford the equipment, Richard mowed lawns for 3 months to buy him a glove. When their mother got sick with pneumonia and couldn't work, Richard dropped out of high school for a semester to support them. If anyone would help him, Richard believed it would be Thomas. Thomas's house was in a suburban neighborhood. Modest compared to Marcus and Jennifer's homes, but still comfortable. A 3-bedroom ranch with a 2-car garage and a basketball hoop in the driveway. Richard knocked on the door. Thomas opened it, surprised but not entirely shocked. "Rich, Jesus Christ, you look like hell. Come in, come in." Richard entered. It was the first warm welcome he'd received. Thomas led him to the kitchen table and poured 2 cups of coffee without asking, the way they'd done 1,000 times before. For 15 minutes, it seemed like Richard had finally found compassion. Thomas listened. He nodded. He asked questions. He seemed genuinely concerned. "So it's all gone, everything?" "Everything," Richard confirmed. "The house is in foreclosure. The company's bankrupt. I've got nothing, Tom." Thomas shook his head slowly. "Man, I can't believe it. You were always so careful with money, so smart about business. How did this happen?" But before Richard could answer, Thomas's wife Barbara entered the kitchen. She stopped when she saw Richard, and her expression changed everything. "Tom, can I talk to you in private?" Thomas and Barbara stepped into the hallway. They spoke in low voices, but Richard could hear fragments. "Absolutely not. We just refinanced. Can't afford our retirement." He made his choices. Thomas returned alone. His expression had changed. The warmth was gone. His shoulders were tense. He wouldn't meet Richard's eyes. "Rich, I want to help, I do, but Barbara's right. We're stretched thin as it is. I've got medical bills from her surgery last year. We're trying to save for retirement. Our daughter's wedding is coming up." Richard spoke quietly. "Tom, I changed your diapers. I worked 2 jobs when Mom was sick so you could stay in school. I co-signed your first car loan when you had no credit. I gave you $50,000 when you were going to lose your house in 2008. You remember that?" There was a long silence. Thomas's voice became harder, now defensive. "And I appreciated all of that, but that was when you had money. You were the successful one. You made your choices. I made mine. You can't expect me to sacrifice everything I've built because you screwed up." He stood up. "There's a church on Maple Street. They have a food pantry on Wednesdays. You should check it out." Thomas walked to the door and opened it. A clear dismissal. Richard left his brother's house and sat in his truck for 20 minutes without starting the engine. The brother he'd raised, the brother he'd saved, gone. Day 4. Richard drove 2 hours to New Haven, to a neighborhood he'd never visited, to an apartment he'd never seen, because Emily had never invited him, not because she didn't want him there, but because she was ashamed. Ashamed that her apartment was so small. Ashamed that she couldn't offer him the luxury he was used to. Ashamed that she'd chosen a different path than the one he'd wanted for her. Emily Hale, 28 years old. She'd graduated from UConn with a degree in social work. She worked at a nonprofit helping homeless families find housing. She made $38,000 a year, and she'd never once asked her father for money. Richard climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The building was modest, clean, but clearly low income. Paint peeling in the stairwell. A flickering light on the 2nd floor landing. The smell of someone cooking rice and beans. Apartment 3C. Richard knocked. He heard footsteps inside, and then Emily opened the door. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, no makeup, hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired, like she'd just gotten home from a long day. Her face lit up with genuine joy. "Dad!" She hugged him immediately, didn't notice his clothes at first, didn't see the stubble on his face or the dirt under his fingernails. Just threw her arms around him and held him tight. Emily hadn't seen her father in 6 months, not because she didn't want to, but because she'd always felt out of place in his world of wealth. The mansion made her uncomfortable. The expensive dinners felt wasteful. Marcus and Jennifer always made subtle comments about her little charity job, so she'd stayed away. But she'd thought about him every day. Emily pulled back, finally seeing his appearance. Her smile faded, replaced by immediate concern. "Dad, what's wrong? Are you okay? Come in, come in." Her apartment was tiny, maybe 600 square feet, a small living room with a second-hand couch and a bookshelf made from cinder blocks and wood planks, a kitchen barely big enough for one person. Emily had furnished it with thrift store finds, but it was warm, lived in. The walls were covered with photos and children's drawings from the families she'd helped. Richard's voice broke. Emily, I lost everything. The company's gone, the house is gone, I don't have anywhere to go. Emily's face showed no calculation, no fear, no concern about what this would cost her, just immediate compassion. Then you'll stay here. Emily, I can't. Yes, you can. You're my dad. You'll take my bedroom. I'll sleep on the couch. This apartment is barely 600 square feet. Emily interrupted him, her voice firm but loving. I don't care. You're staying. End of discussion. She moved to the kitchen, opening cabinets, checking what food she had. I'm making dinner. You look like you haven't eaten in days. She pulled out pasta, a jar of sauce, some frozen vegetables. It's not fancy, but it's hot and it's yours. And just like that, Richard Hale, the man who had built a $47 million empire, broke down crying in his daughter's tiny kitchen. Emily wrapped her arms around him and let him cry. She didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. Just held her father while he sobbed. It's okay, Dad, she whispered. You're safe now, I've got you. News travels fast in wealthy circles. By day 5, everyone in Greenwich knew that Richard Hale had lost everything. The gossip started at the country club. One of Marcus's golf partners mentioned it to the club president. Within hours, it had spread through the entire membership. Richard Hale, the self-made millionaire, the construction magnate, the man who donated $2 million to build the club's new tennis courts, was bankrupt. By the afternoon, it was on local business news sites. Hale Construction founder faces financial collapse. The article was brief, vague on details, but devastating in its implications. The man who'd been a pillar of the community was now a cautionary tale, and the people who'd smiled at him for decades turned vicious. Former business partners avoided his calls. Associates who'd begged him for advice suddenly had nothing to say. People he'd considered friends posted sympathetic messages on social media, but none of them offered actual help. Emily's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Marcus called, Jennifer called, even Thomas called, but they weren't calling to apologize. They were calling to warn her. Emily was at work when Jennifer called. She stepped outside her office to take it, standing in the cold January air. Jennifer's voice was angry. Emily, what the hell are you doing? I heard Dad's staying with you. Emily remained calm, firm. He needed help. Where else was he supposed to go? A shelter, a recovery program. He's going to drag you down with him. You're barely making ends meet as it is. He's our father, Jen. He was a millionaire who made bad decisions. That's not our responsibility to fix. You need to think about your own future. What happens when you can't pay rent because you're feeding him? What happens when you lose your job because you're too stressed to function? I'll figure it out. You're being stupid, Emily. You're throwing your life away for someone who's already thrown his own away. Emily hung up. Her hands were shaking. The pressure was getting to her. Marcus called an hour later with a similar message. You're enabling him, Em. The best thing you can do is let him hit rock bottom. That's when people finally change, Thomas called that evening. Emily, sweetie, I know you think you're helping, but you're not. Rich needs professional help, mental health services, financial counseling, not a couch in your apartment. Day 6. Emily's landlord called. Neighbors had complained about Richard sleeping on the couch. One of them had seen him through the window and assumed he was homeless, squatting in the building. They were worried about property values, about safety, about the kind of people this might attract. The landlord was apologetic but firm. Emily, you're a great tenant, but your lease only allows for one occupant. If your father is staying there permanently, we need to discuss this. And honestly, if the other tenants keep complaining, I may have to ask you to make other arrangements. That evening, Emily came home to find Richard washing dishes in her tiny kitchen. He'd cleaned the entire apartment, scrubbed the floors, organized her bookshelf, trying to be useful, trying not to be a burden. He saw her face immediately. What's wrong? Emily sat down on the couch, exhausted. Nothing, just a long day. Richard dried his hands on a towel. Emily, I heard you on the phone with your landlord. I'm causing you problems. I should go. Emily looked at him, and something in her face hardened with determination. You're not going anywhere. I don't care what the landlord says. I don't care what Marcus or Jennifer or anyone thinks. You're my dad, and you're staying. Richard's eyes filled with tears. Emily, you could lose your apartment, your job. Everything you've worked for. Then I'll lose it, but I'm not abandoning you. That's not who I am. While the world told Emily to abandon her father, she did the opposite. She stood her ground, and that decision, that moment of loyalty when it cost her everything, was about to be rewarded in ways she couldn't imagine. Day 7, January 14th. Richard asked Emily to invite her siblings and uncle to her apartment. He told her he had an announcement. She was confused, but she trusted him. Emily made the phone calls that afternoon. Marcus answered on the first ring, his voice impatient. What does he want now? He just asked if you could come over tonight. He has something to tell all of us. Marcus sighed loudly. Fine, but this better not be Dad asking for money because he's not getting a dime. Jennifer was equally dismissive. I suppose I can spare an hour, but Emily, seriously, you need to start setting boundaries with him. Thomas agreed to come but warned her. This intervention thing only works if he's willing to accept help, Em. That evening at 7:00 p.m. they all arrived. Marcus in his Mercedes, Jennifer in her BMW, Thomas in his Lexus. They parked in front of Emily's rundown building and climbed the stairs with disgust on their faces. Marcus muttered to Jennifer as they walked up, I can't believe she actually lives here. Inside the apartment, the space felt even smaller with 5 people crammed into it. Marcus, Jennifer, and Thomas stood awkwardly, refusing to sit on Emily's second-hand furniture. Emily offered them water, tea, coffee. They all declined. Richard sat on the couch, still wearing his worn clothes, still unshaven, still looking like a man who'd lost everything. Marcus checked his watch. All right, Dad, we're here. What's this about? If you're looking for handouts, you need to understand that we've all got our own. Richard interrupted him calmly. I'm not looking for handouts, Marcus. Richard reached into his duffel bag. The bag they'd all assumed contained his only possessions. He pulled something out slowly, his Patek Philippe watch, the one worth $2 million, the one he'd worn to every major business meeting for the past decade. He placed it on the coffee table. Everyone stared. Silence filled the room. Then Richard pulled out his iPhone, not an old phone, the latest model. He placed it next to the watch. Then a folder. A thick manila folder labeled Hale Construction Full Financial Reports January 2024. He opened the folder slowly, deliberately. Inside were documents, official bank statements, asset reports, tax records. He turned the folder so they could all see the summary page. Company value, $47.3 million. Personal net worth, $52.1 million. The room went silent. You could hear breathing, nothing else. Jennifer's voice came out shaking. What is this? Richard stood up. He looked at each of them one by one. His face was no longer the face of a broken man. It was the face of someone who had seen the truth and wasn't afraid anymore. This was a test. Marcus stepped forward. A test? What the hell are you talking about? I never lost my money. The company never collapsed. There was no failed investment. I made it all up. Jennifer's face went white. You lied. I needed to know who you really were, who would stand by me when I had nothing, who loved me for me, not for my money. Thomas started to speak, but Richard raised his hand. For 7 days, I went to each of you. I came to your homes looking like this, broken, desperate, asking for help. He turned to Marcus. You gave me $200 and told me I was embarrassing myself. He turned to Jennifer. You sent me to a homeless shelter so I wouldn't ruin your reputation. He turned to Thomas. You told me to go to a food pantry, you, the brother I raised, the brother I saved from poverty. The 3 of them stood frozen, faces red with shame and rage and confusion. Richard turned to Emily. She was sitting on the arm of the couch, tears streaming down her face, her hand over her mouth. And then I came to Emily, my youngest daughter. The one I was secretly disappointed in because she chose to help people instead of make money. The one who makes $38,000 a year and lives in 600 square feet. His voice broke. And she took me in without hesitation. She gave me her bed. She fed me. She stood up to her landlord for me. She stood up to all of you for me. When the whole world told her to walk away, she stayed. Thomas stammered. A test? What the hell are you talking about? Richard's voice was calm, measured. I didn't lose anything. I never lost the company. I never lost my money. I transferred everything into a trust for 30 days. I wanted to see what would happen if you all thought I had nothing. Marcus's face went white. Jennifer sat down hard on Emily's couch, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Richard continued, his voice steady and cold. 7 days ago, I came to you, Marcus, my son, the boy I sent to Harvard, the man whose business I funded. I stood at your door, broken and desperate, and asked for help. You gave me $200 and shut the door in my face. Marcus tried to defend himself. Dad, I thought, Richard cut him off. You thought I was a burden. You thought I would embarrass you in front of Ashley and the neighbors and your country club friends. You couldn't even let me inside your house, the house I helped you buy. He turned to Jennifer. Her hands were shaking. Jennifer, you sent me to a homeless shelter. Your own father, you texted me an address and closed the door, because you were worried about your real estate reputation, because having a father who looked poor might hurt your commission. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, but they were angry tears. That's not fair. You taught us to prioritize our careers. You always said business comes first. You said take care of yourself or no one else will. Those were your words, Dad. Richard's voice didn't waver. I said a lot of things when I was building the company, and I was wrong. I taught you to value money over people. I taught you that success meant putting yourself first always, and you learned that lesson perfectly. He turned to Thomas. His brother looked smaller now, shrinking into himself. Tom, my brother, I raised you when Dad died. I worked 2 jobs so you could finish school. I saved your house in 2008 when you were 3 months from foreclosure. When I needed you, you sent me to a food pantry and told me not to come back. Thomas's voice broke. Rich, I didn't know it was a test. You can't blame us for protecting ourselves. If someone shows up claiming they've lost everything, you can't expect us to. Richard's voice rose, loud enough that everyone fell silent again. I can and I do, because one person in this family got it right. Everyone turned to Emily. She looked confused, frightened, like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Richard's voice softened completely as he turned to her. Emily, you make $38,000 a year. You live in 600 square feet. You were one bad month away from losing this apartment. Your landlord threatened to evict you because of me. Your siblings called you stupid. And when I showed up at your door with nothing, you gave me everything you had. Emily's eyes filled with tears. You didn't hesitate. You didn't calculate what it would cost you. You didn't worry about your reputation or your lease or your comfort. You just loved your father, unconditionally. Richard reached into his bag again and pulled out another document. This one was different, thicker, bound in leather. Marcus stared at it. What is that? Richard held it up so they could all see the title page. Last Will and Testament of Richard James Hale. Revised January 14, 2024. The room became absolutely still. What Richard did next would change 5 lives forever. Richard held up the document so they could all see it clearly. This is my new will. I had it drawn up yesterday by my attorney, Gerald Winters. He witnessed everything that happened this week. Every rejection, every door slammed in my face. He looked at Marcus, Jennifer, and Thomas. His voice was firm, final. Marcus, you're removed as executor of my estate. Jennifer, the trust fund I set up for you when you turned 21 is dissolved. Thomas, the loan I gave you in 2008 that I told you didn't need to be repaid. I'm calling it in. $50,000, due in 30 days. Their faces showed shock, horror, anger all at once. Marcus stood up, furious. You can't do this. I'm your son. Richard didn't flinch. You were my son when I had money. When I had nothing, you were a stranger who gave me $200 and told me I was embarrassing. Jennifer was crying now, real tears streaming down her face. Dad, please, I made a mistake. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. If I'd known it was a test, I would have. You were scared of being inconvenienced, Richard interrupted. There's a difference between fear and selfishness, Jennifer. You weren't afraid. You just didn't want to be bothered. Thomas tried a different approach, his voice pleading. Rich, we're family. We've been through everything together. You can't throw away a lifetime over 1 week. 1 week is all it took to see who you really are. And you showed me. Richard turned to Emily. His voice completely changed, warm, loving, gentle. Emily, you're now the sole executor of my estate. When I die, which hopefully won't be for another 20 years, you'll inherit Hale Construction, all of it, the entire company. It's yours. Emily looked shocked, shaking her head violently. Dad, I don't want the company. I don't want any of this. I helped you because you're my father, not because. I know you don't want it, Richard said softly. Which is exactly why you deserve it. You're the only one who loved me when I had nothing to give you. You're the only one who saw me as a person, not a bank account. Richard pulled out a checkbook from his jacket pocket. He wrote carefully, tore out the check, and handed it to Emily. This is a check for $500,000. It's yours, right now. No strings, no conditions. Pay off your student loans, buy a house, quit your job and travel the world. Use it however you want. Emily stared at the check, overwhelmed, crying. Dad, I can't accept this. It's too much. I didn't help you for money. I helped you because I love you. Richard's voice cracked. I know, that's exactly why you're getting it. He turned back to Marcus, Jennifer, and Thomas. The rest of you are not cut off completely. You'll still be in the will, but your inheritance is now conditional. You'll each get 5% of what you would have gotten under the old will. The remaining 95% goes to Emily and to charity. Organizations that help people who have nothing. The kind of work Emily does. The math was devastating. Marcus would inherit $1.2 million instead of $24 million. Jennifer would inherit $1.1 million instead of $22 million. Thomas would inherit $800,000 instead of $16 million. And Emily, who never wanted wealth, who lived to help others, who made poverty wages working with homeless families, would inherit $38 million and full control of a company worth $47 million. Jennifer stood up, her voice desperate. Dad, please give us another chance. We can do better. We can. Richard shook his head. No, the test is over, and you all failed. Marcus stormed toward the door, his face twisted with rage. Turned back one last time, his voice vicious. You know what? You're a manipulative old man. This whole thing was sick, playing games with people's lives. You wanted to humiliate us. You wanted to feel superior. Well, congratulations, Dad. You win. You happy now? Richard's voice remained calm. No, Marcus, I wanted to know if you loved me, and now I have my answer. Marcus's hand was on the doorknob. I did love you, but not anymore. You can keep your money and your company and your tests. I'm done. He left, slamming the door so hard that a picture frame fell off Emily's wall and shattered. Marcus Hale never spoke to his father again. 2 years later, he would file a lawsuit contesting the will, claiming Richard had been mentally incompetent when he revised it. He would hire expensive lawyers and drag the case through courts for 18 months. He would lose. The judge would rule that Richard's test had been elaborate, yes, but perfectly legal, and entirely justified. Jennifer stood frozen in the middle of the apartment. Her face showed a mix of shame and desperation. She approached Richard slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "Dad, I'm sorry, I really am. I was wrong. I was selfish and cruel, and I failed you." Her voice broke. Can we start over, please?" Richard looked at her for a long moment. "Jennifer, I don't know, that's honest. I don't know if we can. What you did hurt me more than you understand. But if you want to try, it starts with you showing up. Not for my money, not to get back in the will, for me, just me." Jennifer nodded, tears streaming. "I will, I promise." Jennifer did show up every Sunday for 6 months. She came to Emily's apartment, and later, when Richard moved back to his estate, she came there. It was awkward. Conversations were stilted. There were long silences. It was painful for both of them. But slowly, gradually, something like a relationship began to rebuild. It would never be what it was, but it became something real. Thomas sat on the couch, head in his hands. He hadn't moved since Marcus left. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He spoke quietly without looking up. "I failed you, Rich, after everything you did for me. After you raised me when Dad died. After you saved my house. I failed you when you needed me most." Richard sat down beside him. "Yeah, you did." There was a long pause. The apartment was silent except for the sound of traffic outside. Richard continued, "But you're my brother, and if you want to earn back my trust, you can. It'll take time. It'll take work, but you can." Thomas looked up, his eyes red. "How? By being there, by showing up, by remembering what family actually means." Thomas took out a second mortgage on his house to repay Richard the $50,000. Richard called him when he found out and told him the debt was forgiven, that he didn't need to pay it back. Thomas paid it anyway, every dollar, because he needed to, because it was the only way he could start to make things right. The apartment slowly emptied. Jennifer left with promises to call. Thomas left with his head down, ashamed but determined. Only Richard and Emily remained. Emily and Richard sat in the quiet apartment. The check still lay on the coffee table between them. Emily hadn't touched it. She spoke quietly. "Why did you do this, Dad? The test, all of it, you hurt people, you hurt yourself. Why?" Richard stared at his hands. "Because somewhere along the way I forgot what mattered. I built a company, made millions, gave you all everything you wanted. Private schools, designer clothes, cars, houses. And in doing that, I taught you to want things more than people." He paused, looking up at her. "Except you, somehow, you learned the opposite lesson. You walked away from all of it. You chose a life helping strangers over a life of luxury. And I needed to know if anyone in this family still knew how to love without conditions." Emily shook her head. "I didn't do anything special, Dad. You needed help. You're my father. That's what you do for family." Richard's voice broke. "That's what makes it special, Emily, that it wasn't special to you. It was just obvious, natural. You didn't think about it. You didn't calculate the cost. You just loved me." Emily picked up the check. She looked at it for a long moment, then at her father. "I'm giving half of this to my nonprofit, the organization that helps homeless families. They're always struggling for funding. This could change everything for them." Richard smiled through tears. "I know you are. That's why I made it $500,000 instead of $250,000. I knew you'd give it away, and I wanted you to still have enough left to change your own life." Emily started crying. She moved across the couch and hugged her father, a real hug, the kind that heals wounds you didn't even know were there. Richard held his daughter and cried, not tears of sadness, tears of relief. He had found what he was looking for. He had found real love. Richard Hale learned something in those 7 days that 62 years of wealth had never taught him. That love isn't proven in abundance, it's proven in scarcity. And the only person who truly loved him was the one who had the least to give. 1 year later, Richard Hale stepped down as CEO of Hale Construction. He appointed Emily as chairman of the board. She didn't run the company, she hired people for that. But she used its resources to fund housing programs across Connecticut. Hale Construction built affordable apartments, shelters for domestic violence survivors, transitional housing for homeless families. Marcus and Jennifer attended the opening ceremony of the first building from a distance. They stood at the back of the crowd, watching their younger sister cut the ribbon. They never asked for forgiveness again. They just watched, wondering what their lives could have been if they'd made a different choice on day one.